Welcome to another episode of Unleash Your Supernova Live. I'm your host, Nova Lorraine, and I'm here with my co-host and partner in crime, Ryon Esquire. And that's Ryon with an O, R-Y-O-N, Esquire. And today we are going to talk about more ways in how you can increase your creativity and beat burnout. I am also the founder of Raine Magazine, the Pink Kangaru Podcast Network, and the Raine School of Fashion, Innovation, and Sustainability. And if you haven't tuned in before, I'm just going to let you know that this is the live companion show to the book, Unleash Your Supernova, available on Amazon and all major bookstores. It was just recently released, so get your copy if you haven't already and learn how you can not only increase creativity, beat burnout, but also tap into your inner brilliance. So let's get ready to start unleashing, y'all. And, before I forget, if you happen to not catch us live, then please check out the podcast, Unleash Your Supernova. Okay? Available on all major podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher. Pick your favorite. It's there. Unleash Your Supernova, the podcast. Hey, Ryon, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm looking forward to today's show. I know we're going to be diving into burnout in a little more detail and sharing some stories, or maybe not, but also, most importantly, sharing how we can avoid burnout, and if we're in the midst of burnout, how we can recover from that. So I'm super excited to talk about that. But I also wanted to just share that this week has been a very weird week. I feel a little off kilter because I've been on the road most of the week and doing mainly mommy duty stuff. My daughter is a senior in high school and looking at colleges, and my son is just wrapping up his gymnastics competition season. So I had a college tour and I had regional championship this week for gymnastics. So it's been a little like, okay, what day is it? And between like the Easter holiday and college tours and gymnastics competitions, I'm just now feeling like I'm settling in, and it's Friday.
I think that brings up an interesting topic because, especially with COVID, moms staying home, and then I think a lot of probably females are thinking about starting, their entrepreneurial journey, and you've obviously done this a while. So, like, what's kind of been your thoughts, your experience, your tips as far as doing this journey with a kid, with family, right? Because, like you've done it for a long time and been successful at it. So, like, what's kind of been your lessons, your words of wisdom regarding that?
It's definitely been a juggle. The struggle of the juggle is real. And I know my fellow
And if the kids are the balls,
definitely...
did you drop any of the balls ever?
I haven't dropped the kids, thankfully. I haven't dropped the kids.
Okay.
The juggle, it's been real, and thankfully no kids have been dropped. But I would say, having been on this entrepreneurial journey from the very beginning as a mother, it's been a challenge. And in the beginning, it was really having an individual that I trust there to support me in terms of giving time to the children that I wasn't able to give when they were young. So my mom actually was a big part of that journey early on for me, where she was there during the day when I was in meetings, when I was at events, when I had to go into the city and purchase fabric for my upcoming collection. And she was the one that was there with my young toddlers and an infant. And so that was extremely helpful and beneficial. But then I also was proactive in dividing my time into personal time, career time, and then there's something else. It's like 3 categories. And really looking at how am I
family
spending
time,
my
probably.
time. Yeah, family time. Thank you.
You're welcome. I was like, what would 3 buckets be? And I'm like,
what was the third
too
one?
Personal. There's got to be a group in there somewhere.
As we're talking about juggling parenthood.
Juggling family. Family.
See, that's what I'm telling you. Burnout is real. But yeah, so I think, and this is before smartphones. So I had a written planner, paper planner, and it was divided into my hours throughout the day and week. And that was, I'm telling you, it sounds old school. It sounds like a waste of time. It was so incredibly helpful because when you're writing it down, it's in your face. You're committing to it. You remember it more. And it did allow me to section off my day so I wouldn't, go 24 hours or whatever, 12, 18 hours of just work, and really pay attention to not just, career time, work time, business time, and family time, but also me time. Because when you're running low, it's really hard to give your best self to your business or your job or your family. And so I think that was an important element of my success in the very beginning. I will say that I fell off of that habit, and that then I haven't thought about this in years actually. So now going back when I was not using that, thank you, when I was not using that system, it definitely accelerated that track to burnout much faster. So I would say that was something I did early on. I would say now, in terms of balance, it's being intentional with my environment and making sure that the people that I'm spending the most time with, the activities that I'm spending the most time on, and the information that I'm consuming the most all contribute to an upward growth and positive emotions and productive output. I think, again, that was maybe something I did either accidentally or intuitively, but not necessarily intentionally. So I think right now that's been something that I've been very intentional on. And then also, as our kids get older, there's less structured activities between you and them. So you have to be even more intentional in when you get that mommy me time. And so creating lunch dates with my daughter, for example, or road trips maybe, with my kids, or, a spontaneous, hey, let's go on a drive, let's go to the park, let's play volleyball, So I think it's harder when you don't have, you have to bring your child to soccer practice every day, or you have to set up these play dates, or you have to go to these school, activities that are structured for your children. I think especially in the time of the pandemic, you have to be more intentional and not just being around your children, because we are around our kids now in the home, and we may substitute that for quality time spent. That's very different than intentional face-to-face interaction. So I think as it relates to juggling that, it's just being more intentional and paying attention to how am I spending my time and what I'm doing with that time.
Yeah, there were several things that I like to respond to. We'll start with the calendar thing. You've heard me talk about all the time, but it's crazy how just writing something down gives it power, gives it permanence, gives it concreteness. And I think it's what you were tapping into when you were doing that daily planner was not only was it in your face every day of what I'm doing with my time, but when you actually see it there, it lets you realize how much time you're spending in every category. So you can be like, oh, wow, I'm way out of whack here. I need to be more intentional about scheduling time with my family, my friends, my kids. So I think that is, super important as well. And I've often heard there's no better time manager than a mom. And I think that's true, just because they're juggling so much more than fathers are in many cases. So having that planned out, it does become super important, because if you don't have those deadlines, not only are you going to fit stuff within the deadline, but it's super easy not to be like, oh, sorry, I've got to quit this and go to this, right? So it forces you to not only be to get everything done within a shorter period of time, which is part of time management and hitting goals. But it also forces you to stop and move to something else to get it done, right? Like you know, you're like, we can all, especially as creatives, just keep making better, keep making better, keep making better. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's appreciably enough better to where you shouldn't have stopped 3 hours ago on it, right? I think that those are super, important for people to realize. And I think you did tap into intuitively. And I also think that you're talking about, and this is something we all get better at as we get older, as we're along this growth journey of, you're intentional about making sure everything's working together toward an ultimate goal, right? And I think that's super powerful because, you're talking about, in many ways, it's more difficult as kids get older because, they kind of live their own lives and, you're not structuring it as much, and it makes it less predictable. Well, part of, working everything together is, maybe you do bring your kids along for a business part. So they learn what it's like what adults talk about, what adults talk like, what kind of work goes into meeting people correctly, being polite, right? I mean, that's as much of a quality time because you're intentional about showing kids how to be adults, how to be proper adults, how to be professional adults, right? And that's is an important part of raising children as, quality time spent with that kid one-on-one, talking about whatever that kid wants to talk about, right, which is also super important. So I think, you were doing all that kind of stuff, like I said, maybe not intentionally at the time, but I think as you got older and more experienced, you did make it intentional. And, that's what it's all about. It's learning, growing, evolving, and then figuring out what works for you, right? And then the last thing you were talking about that was not related to the calendar. What was the last point? There was something else that I thought was really, I can't remember now. But yeah,
I was talking about the environment, like the social, like just being intentional about who wants any time with what I'm doing, but then also making that interactive time with the kids.
Yep. I kind of talked about that, but there was something else. But yeah, no. So that's kind of my non-parental kind of what I've learned as far as why that kind of stuff works. Oh, you were talking about time with because of COVID and stuff, right? And you're right. Quality time. Like we do think more time together is quality, and I agree with you. It's not, right? Like this kind of goes back to like you're talking about intentionally making like trips with your daughter, right? That's very different because, you're spending time together, in many ways, talking about things that allow them to open up to where they get to learn more about you or you get to learn more about them or they get to question things and get your opinions while they're forming their own opinions, right? And you get to see the more real of them, the more raw of them that they're going to be around their siblings because, there's as much of a family dynamic that affects behavior as there is, individual dynamics that affect behavior, right? And, when they're in the family group, I remember being young, like real little, and my sister being in the back seat, having to raise her hand in the back car to talk because I talk a lot. And my mom would be like, "What is it, Amber?" And she'd be like, "I forgot." I don't think she ever had anything to say. I think she just wanted to be heard, right? And that was the only way she'd get a word in edgewise. So that's a family dynamic that, if I'm out of the equation, it doesn't happen to my mom and sister, right? So, I think that's a big part of it too with COVID. Is being intentional about spending quality time with your kids individually versus with a group.
Absolutely. So I think this would be a good chance to transition, or a good time to transition into how the heck do we beat burnout? Better yet, avoid burnout, and what are those signs? And so I'd love to shift to some real, raw stories of burnout. If you have it, I know I have some, or at least getting to the point of burnout and figuring out, how to pivot. real quick.
Right.
So let's talk about that, because I feel that especially now in this COVID time, that more and more people are dealing with burnout, stress, anxiety, depression, and not really knowing how to catch those signs before it gets, very severe, and or how to avoid it altogether. So first, I'd love to hear your perspective of burnout. What do you think it is? And then if you personally have experienced burnout, yes, no, and why?
Yeah, no, burnout is essentially the fact that you never step away from what you're doing, whether it's family, whether it's work, because it can come from either one, and take time for yourself, right? You're always on, which is why you get burned out, because you never have that downtime to recharge intellectually, physically, and emotionally. Like, they're all three, even spiritually. They're all four super important, that you need that time alone to not have to be on, to not have to be funny, charming, engaging, right, whatever, and just kind of almost sit in your own silence and just heal is what I used to always call it, which, heal, recharge, the same thing. So that's why, burnout's been a big thing for a long time, but COVID just amplified it, because work, family, home, we're all obviously in the same place, right? Like where are you going to go to get away from work when you're working from home? Where are you going to go to get away from your kids, your spouse, when you're working from home? And it really becomes, you have to be intentional. And intentional is great, but you have to be consistent in enforcing this too, which is scheduling that time to do whatever you need to do to recharge, whether it's read, whether it's meditate, whether it's exercise, whether it's just sit alone in a dark room, be quiet, whatever you need to recharge. That you just have to be intentional about it for burnout. Have I ever suffered from burnout? I have not. But I think it's because, I got sick and almost died at 11 years old. And so I think I just randomly realized at a super young age, there's a whole hell of a lot more to life than work. And so work has never been my number one priority. It just hasn't been. I love work. I love being great at what I do, but I'm so much more than what I do. And as a result, I get tired of something, or I just don't have a hard time of really protecting my time. I've always I don't work on weekends, right? I pretty much quit at a certain time of day. I just really protect my time. That's also easier being a single male. Like, if I was married with kids, this conversation in some ways would be very different. And in some ways, I would still have to protect my time. Would be protecting it for myself, but then I would also be protecting time for spend time with the spouse or kids as well, right? So it would just pivot a little bit. But so I've never suffered it, and that's why, because my perspective's been different, because Americans are so proud of, working 18 hours a day, going on 4 hours of sleep. I mean, we just pride ourselves on that. And, that just sets up the perfect recipe for people to get burned out.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's so interesting that you have that unique perspective, and you had it at such a young age. One of my
because I don't come from parents like that, trust me.
Yeah, I would say one of my favorite books is The 4-Hour Workweek. I was like, whoa, you can work in 4 hours a week and that's it, and still make money?
Yeah.
I was so all over that book
many
years ago when it
kind
came
of a myth,
out.
But I was too.
It's actually still on my bookshelf. I'm looking at it right now. And yes, how Tim Ferriss did it, he was way ahead of the curve and used internet to his advantage and remote working to his advantage way before it was a thing. And he capitalized on it. But I would say that was something that always, for me, lifestyle and living, it was always the thing that motivated me and drove me. But I think that also that desire to have that lifestyle that you want can easily lead you down the road of burnout because you're so fixed and focused on that goal that
Absolutely.
you forget that it's truly a journey, and then you end up on this sort of, I don't know, like this, some of us call it the rat race or the hamster wheel or whatever it is.
Hamster wheel.
Yeah. And so I think it's interesting, going back to your point of your perspective. And when things are put into, when you sort of step away, right, from this bubble that most of us are in, you kind of step outside it and you look at it from that perspective of, whoa, this is not such a big deal. Why am I taking this so seriously? Yep. Why am I, running myself into the ground? Why am I so angry? Why this? Why that? When you step outside the bubble and really observe your actions, your emotions, how you're spending your time, who you're spending it with, from this sort of third-person perspective, it really does bring a lot of clarity when you get to a point of life or death and you resort your priorities. It really gives you a broader perspective.
At your bedside, So.
Yeah, and I like to, when I'm mentoring students, I like to say, and if they're working with me on particular projects, and I'm very particular, I really stress quality, paying attention to the details, whatever it is, a high level of high quality output. But at the same time, I say, listen, right? We are not performing brain surgery right now. And I use that because I've been around medicine most of my life, and I like to, again, it helps sort of kind of shock people into perspective. Yes, you're working on this project. You may be working on something creative or not, and someone's life is not on the line. So when you just step away from, I'm not going to beat my head against the wall if I don't get this right, if I make a mistake, and you're able to let go a little bit and not be so fearful, and you're kind of moving forward, taking more chances, developing that self-confidence that's needed to make more decisions on your own, and more creative decisions on your own. And it just gives a little bit of that freedom and flexibility when you just say, let's just put this in perspective. Yes, there's a job that needs to be done, and it should be done well, but it's not life-threatening. So, just don't take it too seriously. Give your best self without the detriment of your health, basically.
And that's much easier to do because you're the boss. That's much harder to do when your boss is putting those deadlines on you.
That's true. And that's very true.
It doesn't have those type of, reasonable expectations.
That's a good point. And I've worked with some of those. And it absolutely does affect your health, your sense of self, your physical health. A lot of times your physical health is a reflection of your mental health. And how do you, what are the thoughts that are going through your head about yourself, and others, and your activities and things like that, and actions. And so I do think it's so important to kind of check in with that. And if you are in an environment like that, if it's toxic, because again, we were mentioning earlier about being intentional with the environment you put yourself in. If that environment is toxic, you have to ask yourself, is it worth your health?
Yeah.
Because we do not know what that physical expression is going to look like from that toxic space you're in. So for example, if we're eating food that is toxic, we're going to say, we're either going to throw up, I don't know, we may not be able to get out of bed in the morning. Maybe we're going to have severe body aches. We expect a physical reaction from food that may be spoiled or not good for us, right? Like too much sugar, too many chemicals, whatever. Right. But how many times do we kind of stop and ask ourselves, is this environment toxic, and what is that expression going to look like? Is it going to?
It's super hard to do because it's not as direct, right? You eat bad food, you throw up, you know what the cause is. You start a job or boss changes or whatever, and the environment becomes stressful. But stress takes a little while to build up. So it makes it much harder for people to pinpoint what's truly causing their health issues. Is it diet? Is it work stress? Is it family stress? And you know, again, Americans are kind of like, oh, suck it up, buttercup, right? And so we have a really hard time admitting that, you know, this job sucks, this environment sucks. I need to go do something that's better for me, because unfortunately, a lot of times what's better for you in many ways is less pay because it's fewer hours. Not always, but unfortunately many times it is. And then you start feeling guilty because, oh, I'm now harming my family. I'm being selfish, kind of what we were talking about, you know, a couple weeks ago with moms. I'm being selfish because I'm worried about my health, and now my family is going to suffer financially. And you know, so it's a complicated issue because like there's so many different causes, so many different things, and it's such a vicious cycle that it's really hard to say, oh, do this one thing, right? You just have to figure out what's best for you. And I think one of the other important things to realize is I don't care what decision you're making, every decision has consequences. And the question then becomes, right, are you willing to accept the consequences of the decision that you're getting ready to make? And like that becomes, because like I said, every decision has consequences. And so that's what it boils down to. And the answer is yes, then do it. The answer is no, then you're going to have to either ask a different question or find a different solution.
I love that. And it's so simple. Every decision has consequences. Do I want to accept
overcomplicate life? Have you not noticed that? Because if shit's complicated, you can sell a solution. When
That's
stuff
right.
is simple, like who's going to pay for it?
Yeah. That's interesting. And I love how simple that is, because I think a lot of people would say, oh, I'm in this situation and I don't have a choice and I have to do this for that. Okay, well, know that if you stay in this situation, there are consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Go through those consequences and then ask yourself again, am I willing and ready for those consequences? And that's a choice too, right? Because I think a lot of times we feel that we're sort of paralyzed of moving one way or another because we feel like we don't have a choice, that this circumstance is beyond me. I don't know how I got here, or these circumstances led me here and they were out of my control and this is out of my control. And at the very least, you can say, I could stay in this chair or I could walk out the door. They both have consequences. Which of the two would I rather deal with? And I think going past that, what's the consequence in the next hour versus a month from now, am I ready for that too? You know, so I think that really helps. And I think that it's so important for our listeners to know that you always have a choice. Staying still is a choice. Doing nothing is a choice. Getting up and moving is a choice. Walking out that door is a choice. Hanging up the phone is a choice. Saying no is a choice. Saying nothing is a choice. You always have a choice. But I love Ryan's, point about from that choice, and the choice is I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to say nothing. I'm going to stay still, whatever it is. What are those consequences? Mm-hmm. Do you like how that feels? I go back to feelings because we say, okay, can I deal with this consequence? Our gut reaction, to something is either it just feels good or it doesn't. If someone offers you, I don't know, $100 bill versus a spoiled apple, it either feels good or it doesn't.
Yeah.
So going back to how does it feel? How does that consequence feel, based on the choice that you're making right now? And that's powerful. And I think it's something that we should be telling our children, because it's easy to say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And then the child says, I'm going to do it just because you told me not to. You could say, okay, let's look at the choices, or a couple of choices, and let's look at the consequences. How do those consequences feel? Let that guide you. Because, you know what, we're not always going to be around our children when they have those, experiences that they're deciding between. But going back to ourselves, I think that it's so important for us to do that mental check-in, and because that can really help prevent getting to the point of burnout. So my turn, I'm going to share a personal story of burnout or almost burnout, and this is fresh. And so I have a lot of stories. how I pivoted, which I think is a reason why I decided to, put this in the book in terms of how can we beat burnout, because a lot of us do face it, and it takes that moment for us to pivot and, again, start being intentional. So just recently, as our listeners know that have been following us on this journey, have been following me on my personal journey, that I've recently released a book called Unleash Your Supernova, and the launch date happened March 16th, and so I received the word that I had a contract, a publishing deal, and I believe it was May of last year. So we're looking at, 8-9 months of mental preparation towards this launch. And this is something that I had been envisioning even before I got the book deal. So I had the idea of this book in 2017. It took years to bring to life. And then once it was written, it then took time to get the yes from an agent, time to get the yes from a publisher. So I've been on this mental journey for quite a bit of time. And then the shotgun went off, when I used to do track, so I'm thinking of when you're at, you're about to do that
starting
pistol.
Starting
pistol. Thank you,
Ryan. It's a shotgun wedding, and it's a starting pistol.
The starting pistol went off. But now,
unless you went to a hillbilly school, maybe it was a shotgun. But.
Hey, listen, maybe. So no, I didn't actually. So anyway, going back to my track days, that starting pistol went off, and it was game on. The sprint, started. And so I've been on this sprint. And for those of us who have ran track, who've run the 200 or the 100 or even the 400, it is an intense sprint.
Yep.
So the energy that you need to, create and expel to have a competitive time is tremendous. So anyway, I'm on this sprint. March 16th happened. Now it's the week of launch, and in my mind, I have a reserve for that week. And at the end of that week, I hit a wall. I physically just did not want to look at emails, open requests for interviews. I didn't want to be online. I didn't want to be on social. But this is literally day 8 of launch of my book that I've been working on for so many years and been looking forward to for so long, preparing for months. But I had just enough energy to cross the finish line, which was March 16th. And when you have that little sort of putt, that took me to the end of the week. And I recognized that it was time for me to just pull back, because the creative output that the well had run, not dry, but it was running really low. And I had to pull back to recharge, to re-energize, to refill. And so I did. And it took about a week and a half, and just to take a mental break, just to create space between the project and myself. And during that time, I was creating again and coming up with ideas and being re-inspired, because now it's a new phase of this project. But I needed to do that, slow down, pause, take a break, refocus, just literally turn my attention to something else and come back stronger than ever. So I am revved up. I remember last Friday on our last show, we were talking, and I was like, yes, I am ready. Let's go. I was charged. And but I needed that. I needed that space. And I intuitively do that now. I physically start resisting these day-to-day activities that I'm so used to, that I may look forward to. And that's my body saying, time to pause, time to recharge, time to reflect, and slow down. So I physically do that now, where I don't, I think that if I just kept going, I would have burnt out. And we would be having a different conversation right now. So I do think it's so important to look for those physical cues and mental cues to slow down.
And I agree. And what you kind of tapped in intuitively is something that I think a lot of us don't realize is, everything is cyclical with, in life, whether it's the seasons or all the way down to human thoughts, emotions, and energy, right? And because you set that finish line and your body was prepared for that, and once you were done, your body's like, oh, I'm done. I've done what I was set out to do. I need to heal. And so the importance that I'm getting ready to make as far as the cyclical part is knowing that that's the way it works, embracing it, and not viewing downtime as laziness in the situation, but viewing it almost like active recovery. If you go back to the analogy of an athlete, it's you're actively allowing your body to heal, from, as far as from the energy expenditure, but also from the focus. Focus kind of hampers creativity sometimes, and so you kind of have to let your brain relax. So not only can it heal, but it can start making those random connections that we define as creativity, right? That only happens when you're not focused really hard on a specific thought, deadline, goal, whatever, right? And so viewing it more like active recovery, like a purposeful part of the, in this example, the creative cycle, or just, from the cycle of setting the goal, accomplishing a goal, and, part of it is healing, resting. I think makes it easier for people to accept that I'm not being lazy. I'm not being productive. I'm really setting myself up for my next cycle of productivity. And I think that's something you kind of tapped into. But I think it's important for people to know that that's how that really truly works, and it's okay, and that they should embrace it that way versus feeling like they must immediately find the next task in order to feel like a productive member of society.
Yeah, no, I love those points that you made. And I want to take this moment because I want to dive into some specific tips on how to beat burnout beyond what we've already shared with our listeners. I want to take this moment to recognize our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Pink Kangaroo. Pink Kangaroo Podcast Network is a home for wild thinkers. If you are a host and you are looking for guidance, support, or strategy on how to launch, grow, or monetize your show, definitely check out the Pink Kangaroo Network. If you are a listener and looking for a home for shows to inspire you, educate you, and entertain you, definitely check out pinkkangaroo.com. And that's kangaroo with a U. And again, it's a home for wild thinkers. Pink Kangaroo loves helping hosts bring their stories to life. That's from our sponsor, Pink Kangaroo. So going back to beating burnout, we've heard from Ryon, and if you're just tuning in now, I'm just going to give a little bit of a recap. Ryon had a life-threatening disease at age 11, which took away his sight. So he came close to that moment of life or death, which shifted his perspective of life. So he grew up with this really amazing viewpoint of how to look at life and how to look at work and putting that into perspective. A lot of us are either on the hamster wheel or in the midst of the rat race, and we haven't taken that time to step outside the bubble and put things in perspective or recognize when it's time for our bodies and minds to slow down, pause, take a break, or pivot. And this can lead to stress, anxiety, depression, and or worse. And so as those of you who've gotten to know me, you know that I have a master's in clinical psychology. I really believe in the power of using for a variety of tools to assist us in a positive state of mind and well-being and mental health. And so it's so important for us to recognize these moments of approaching burnout. But what do we do, right? Because we're mothers, we're fathers, we're bosses, we're team members, we're staff members or employees, we're brothers, we're uncles, we're aunts. We have all these responsibilities. What do we do to recognize and or beat burnout? So let's look at some tips that are in the book, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. There, as you know, 101 tips in increasing creativity and beating burnout. There's actually more than that, but you're going to definitely get at least over 100. But let's just look at a few of these for a moment before we go to our last segment of the show where we take a question or two from our listeners. So this one tip jumps out at me, Ryan. I'd love to know your thoughts, and I think we maybe have touched on it a little bit. Reset your standards, at least temporarily. As creatives, we are renowned for setting high standards for our work. Achieving creative perfection is difficult enough on its own, but coupled with looming deadlines, professional peer pressure, and other strains, it's simply impossible to always produce perfect creative work. So, step back, recharge, and accept that the standard of work you produce will have to be a little lower than usual, which is better than not being able to produce anything at all. What are your thoughts about that?
Part of it is I agree with the reset as far as you had the word perfect in there. Perfect's an illusion. I think that's the first thing people should realize. It's a word we use, a word we like to throw around, makes us feel good about ourselves. But perfect's an illusion. Because even if you do something perfectly, in many ways that's eye of the beholder. So I think knowing that and realizing that is important because it removes a tremendous amount of self-imposed pressure that allows you, to be more creative, and it just frees you up in many ways. As far as lower your standard, maybe not. I think I would go with redefine it from the standpoint of, redefine what you think great or acceptable work for you to produce is, which is different from perfect. I think that's important. And I also think, establishing deadlines would help. I'm going to do the absolute best project that I can do by this date. Once this date is done, it's done, and we move on to the next thing, right? Because like I mentioned earlier in the show, as creatives, we can always go back and do what we think is improving, right? That's who we are, right? But that doesn't mean it really is better. It's just different. And I think, again, realizing that's important. So I think creating those deadlines, I would probably do before I lowered my standard of quality of work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say quality, more so maybe quantity. And
yes,
I guess for some people it may be quality. So I find, at least in the space of entrepreneurs and or creatives, there is this level of perfection or this higher standard of what can be achieved within a certain amount of time. And if you are bent on putting out 100 pieces of creative content a day, and that is your goal, and this is what you should be doing, and you've done it for 3 weeks straight, and you're starting to feel a little run down, well, maybe cut that in half and know that that's okay. Because when you completely get to zero, guess what? You're going to have 0 pieces of content that you're putting out. So it's better to have 50 pieces versus 0, in the middle of burnout. So it's a matter of resetting your standards to endure the journey. And I think that's what this is all about, that we keep bringing up in each episode, is that this is, life is a journey. It's a marathon. It's a journey. Yeah. It's how can you enjoy each day of this journey? And if it's not enjoyable, then let's reassess, let's reflect. Maybe it is just as simple as resetting what you've created as your standards. That's typically self-imposed. And so I'm very much, Ryan is the same, we're very much quality over quantity. That's our thing, And so letting go of anything less than what we feel is our highest quality of work is something that's very difficult for us But sometimes what we consider our highest quality is 10 times more what someone else would consider quality work. So all I'm saying is reset for the sake of your health. Because at the end of the day, if you're not healthy, if you don't feel good, if you're sad, if you're moping, you're not going to be productive anyway. So I think that was a tip that really jumped out at me. Another tip that I thought this was really, it could be fun, actually, is go big. This is tip number 17.
Complete opposite of reset your standard, but go ahead.
This is opposite, yeah. So listen to this. Go big. This is in the book, guys. Yeah. Think of the wildest, biggest idea without worrying about cost or practicality. Then work back until it becomes feasible. Once you've thought of crazy ideas, what you can achieve seems much more doable. So it's sort of like go super big on something, like, I don't know, and then work backwards to something that is, more doable today. And then what you're doing today doesn't seem so overwhelming, right? And it it helps change your perspective.
Yeah, it's the contrast. I also think, with the working big part, if you do it correctly, I think you tap into what you're passionate about. Passion really helps motivate people and allows them to deal with those difficult times. And also, when you're working towards something that is that much bigger than yourself, it goes back to your standard. It redefines the importance of the work, and it allows things to have more meaning, which makes the work not only more enjoyable, but easier to accomplish, right? Because you're working towards something more important, bigger than you. And whenever people have purpose, it's so much easier for us to go that extra mile, right? To go beyond, because we're a species that is built on community, and helping the community survive, it helps the species survive, right? So, I think that's what it kind of taps in a lot of ways.
I agree. And one of the other tips that jump out at me, again, there's many, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Ryon. It's career and lifestyle. How long have you been doing what you're doing? Do you expect to do it forever? Perhaps you need bigger changes in your life. A new city, a new company, or a new hobby might be the only way to move your life forward.
That's so interesting, because what that really requires, like you said, is like the intention. Intentionally stepping back and evaluating your life, what it's currently like, what's important to you, and is the life you're currently living matching up with what's truly important to you. And that's been one of the things that's come about as a result of COVID. People working from home, and it's not only giving them a different experience, but it's really giving them that time to step back and go, was working 80 hours a week, 60, really the life I wanted to live? Yeah, the money's great, but what was I doing with it? Like, I wouldn't see my family, wouldn't see my friends. I'm prematurely graying. I've gained 50 pounds, like whatever the situation may be. And it's really allowed them and caused them to reassess, and the fact that we now have, many of us who work white-collar jobs have more flexibility in this fact that we can work from home. I can go now live in Nashville versus San Francisco, still have an amazing quality of life for a whole hell of a lot cheaper, and then do things that I want to do that not only rejuvenate me, but nourish me intellectually, nourish me physically, nourish me, personally, right? Like relationship-wise. And so it's funny that you say that, because I think that's been a big unforeseen result of COVID. Is it really caused people to reassess what was truly important to them.
Yes, yes. So many things have come out of this year, right? Because this is actually over a year now.
It's over a year.
Yeah, so many things. And I think it's really, really important to look at the positive things as it relates to ourselves and say, is this a moment to reflect? And I personally know so many people who have shared that. They've taken this time to reflect, reassess, pivot, change. And it's exciting. It's exciting. And sometimes it takes really dark moments for us to make those drastic changes in our lives. And it's exciting to see their attitude change, their emotions
like
lift,
a whole new person.
And this new adventure that they're looking at life as. Like, whoa, this is something that's exciting. And I could talk about this topic of beating burnout all day long. Because there's been many times where I've recognized when it was time to shift, change, pivot, slow down, pause in my life, and may have been due to juggling, career and motherhood, my desires as an entrepreneur and a creative, my whatever vision I had as the role of a wife, mother, and designer. There's so many times where I've had to sort of, what they call it, the weeble wobble, that toy, or the weeble wobble, don't fall down. There's so many times where I've had to sort of just bend just enough to come back up. And so I think this is a great topic. I definitely want to dive into this more as we do future episodes. But I also want us to, of course, answer a question from our listeners. This is our last segment of the show, guys. So, we got to fit this in. So this question is for the both of us, Ryon. It is, as an entrepreneur, what is your greatest fear and how do you manage it?
Oh, shit. This is my greatest fear as an entrepreneur. This is my greatest fear as a person. I have a desire to be great at what I do and to be a great person. My greatest fear is not reaching great. And great's one of those things that, in many ways, it's a never-ending journey because you just kind of reset that definition, that standard. So I guess it's not doing the things that I think I need to do to continually be on that path of progress toward greatness, whatever that may be. Which greatness could also be redefined and probably more appropriately defined in a professional context as significance. I want to do things that make significant changes in the world, whether it's world of business, whether it's world of my family, my friends, my community, right? So I want to do things that are significant to the world, and my greatest fear is not doing that.
Yeah, I can see why we get along so well.
That's probably a different answer than what most people would have given, but that's probably my greatest fear.
Yeah, no, I relate to that so much. And, as you were answering the question and as I was reading the question, I was also trying to think about what is my greatest fear as an entrepreneur. And to be honest, I didn't call myself an entrepreneur all my life. I wasn't even in my, vocabulary as a child, as a teenager.
It's kind of last 15 years term, So my dad, he was a business owner. He was self-employed. He wasn't an entrepreneur. That was kind of a tech era word, I think, when that became trendy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just had goals. I wanted to help people, and then that shifted from, psychology and medicine to fashion, and then I wanted to make an impact on the history of fashion, and then that grew into launching a platform to help creative individuals that wanted to turn their passions into their livelihood. And so it was always this thing, and then, of course, entrepreneur got layered onto it as I was diving deeper into Raine magazine. But I would say my fear has always been around failing. And I think it was more in the eyes of others. And I was always a high achiever from sports to academics. And I felt that, there's a standard I always held myself to. And I didn't want to let other people down. Like, I felt that I had this weight on my shoulders to help so many people. And if I failed at this task, I never get to the next goal or the next achievement, and I'd fail. And I think what I've learned, going back to the second part of that question, is how do you manage it? What I've learned that there's really no such thing as failing. It's just you're learning what doesn't work. And it's really cool and exciting to learn what doesn't work because it takes you closer to what does. And I love games. I love puzzles. I love problem solving. So for me, it's like, ooh, this is a problem. What is the solution? So I just change the direction of my thoughts to something that I find fun again. How do you win this game? And seeing life as more of a game, seeing these projects or tasks as more as like strategy and how do you get to the finish line the fastest with the best results, right? So I've just changed my perspective, and failure I don't even really talk about failure. I talk about problem solving, and going further, I talk about solutions. So for me, it's about finding solutions that work, and these are just challenges that you're confronted with to find the best solution. So I think that's all the time we have for today. It was such a pleasure talking with you again, Ryon, sharing this platform, helping,
as always,
bring just more guidance to our listeners as it relates to unleashing your supernova. So again, thank you for joining us for another episode. Tune in next week as we share words of wisdom around tapping into your limitless potential, releasing that inner brilliance that we all have. And so again, join us for another episode of Unleash Your Supernova. If you can't catch the live show, definitely check out the podcast, available on all platforms. Again, this was brought to you by the Pink Kangaru Network, and that's Kangaroo to you guys. Until next time, bye.
Have a great week, everybody.